Hi everyone, welcome to this co-production of WION and VOA. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani, coming to you live from New York City. Let's start off with what's happening in Syria as top aides to U.S. President Joe Biden are in the Middle East this week to push for a ceasefire in Gaza and to deal with the fallout in Syria following the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad. The visit comes amid military maneuvers from neighboring countries, including the U.S. allies, both Israel and Turkey. White House Bureau Chief for Voice of America, Patsy Widakuswara, has this report.
Celebrations in Latakia, the heartland of ousted Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's minority Alawite community, as neighboring countries make their moves. Israeli troops advanced deeper into the UN-patrolled buffer zone, separating the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and Syrian territory, following hundreds of Israeli airstrikes across Syria. In Israel Thursday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sullivan defended the U.S. allies' actions.
What Israel saw was an immediate threat. The collapse of a structure that had been in place for a long time, and the potential for that vacuum to be filled by a direct proximate threat right across. So it moved in to fill that threat. That, from the United States' perspective, is logical and consistent with Israel's right to self-defense.
The United Nations said Israel's actions violates the country's 1974 disengagement agreement with Syria, signed after the 1973 Mideast War.
There is absolutely no basis under international law to preventively or preemptively disarm a country you don't like.
Meanwhile, Syrian Kurds near the northern border with Turkey have been displaced amid clashes between U.S.-backed Kurdish forces and Ankara-backed Syrian rebels. The U.S. brokered a ceasefire deal between the groups Wednesday. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Jordan Thursday before heading to Ankara. He said Turkey faces a real threat from Kurdish separatists.
At the same time, again, we want to avoid sparking any kinds of additional conflicts inside of Syria at a time when we want to see this transition to an interim government and to a better way forward for Syria. And part of that also has to be ensuring that ISIS doesn't rear its ugly head again.
Blinken and Sullivan are also making a last-ditch diplomatic push to achieve a deal to end fighting between Israel and Hamas in Gaza that would also free hostages held by the U.S.-designated terror group. The U.S. believes Hamas is holding 3 living American hostages and the bodies of 4 others. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by VOA's Jessica Stone. She's joining us live from the White House in Washington, D.C. Jessica, good to see you.
Hey, good morning.
The takeover in Syria resulted in an American being freed from prison. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so his name is Travis Pete Timmerman, known as Pete. He's from the state of Missouri in the middle of the country, and he was in actually Hungary and reported missing there in the spring, in the month of May, but found his way, he says, on a pilgrimage to the Syrian border, was picked up by border agents, and was put in one of the most notorious prisons in Syria ever since. He was released along with many others in prison when those rebels kicked Assad out of office. And Timmerman says, though, that he was fed well, that he always had water, but he says he did not have regular access to a bathroom. So he is still recovering and getting a chance to plan a meeting with his family now.
Extraordinary. Jessica, President Biden's policy team is in the region to work on the smooth transition of power, but the incoming Trump administration has expressed a lower level of commitment to Syria. How is that change playing out?
Yeah, so there's definitely a contrast between the two governments' styles when it comes to international interventions, and we're seeing that here in the case of Syria. Biden has already launched airstrikes against Islamic State, whereas Trump has been saying he wants to avoid involvement in Syria altogether, saying, quote, "This is not our fight," on social media. Now, this has implications, though, for Israel, of course, a key ally to the United States, as well as Jordan, where there could be a resurgence of Islamic State if there is no U.S. involvement. So we do have some analysts here in Washington arguing that reducing Syria's access to chemical weapons will also reduce the influence of extremist groups, and that might be a reason for the United States to get involved. But remember, that was also an argument under Barack Obama to get involved, and he did. This president has this incoming president, I should say, has a different approach.
Okay, Jessica, please do stay with us. President-elect Donald Trump has nominated New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to be his United Nations ambassador. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir looks at the representative's rising career and what lies ahead.
I rise today to nominate the gentleman.
Elise Stefanik entered Congress in 2014 at age 30 as a moderate Republican representing a large, mostly rural district in northern New York State.
She initially was not particularly a President Trump supporter, became one, moved up the ranks to party leadership in Congress, so that she is now, until she resigns, the chair of the Republican conference.
As conference chair since 2021, she is the fourth-ranking House Republican.
She did not attend the Republican convention in Cleveland in 2016, and it was really only after his election and his sort of ascendancy, especially among conservatives, that she went, as she has put it, ultra MAGA.
For Stefanik, that meant defending Trump during his impeachments, his claims that the 2020 election was stolen, and being a strong campaign surrogate.
She is smart. She is a very hard worker. She is rhetorically extremely effective.
Stefanik rose to prominence during congressional hearings in which she challenged the handling of pro-Palestinian protests on some university campuses. 3 prominent university presidents stepped down following the hearings.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
In May, she expressed staunch support for Israel in remarks before the Israeli Knesset and has received significant campaign contributions from pro-Israel lobbies and individuals. Trump announced Stefanik as one of his first cabinet picks just 5 days after the election. She will come to the United Nations with limited foreign policy experience as the world body deals with wars in Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan, soaring global hunger, climate change, and a raft of other crises.
I think that it's probable that once she becomes ambassador, Elise Stefanik is going to be focused on the Middle East. She may have to focus on Ukraine. And it seems probable, given her past statements, that she is going to be very critical towards China.
In his first term, Trump cut hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. funding to several UN agencies. This time, the organization is making contingency plans for much deeper cuts. In the meantime, Elise Stefanik will find herself on a new international stage. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Jessica Stone is back with us now. Jessica, what are Stefanik's prospects for confirmation at this point? Do we know?
Well, she's not a particularly controversial pick, and she's been on Capitol Hill this week meeting with senators to persuade them to vote for her and to confirm her. But she did get a major headline and a major sign of support from a Democratic senator, John Fetterman, from the state of Pennsylvania. The two agree on her stances against anti-Semitism. They're both ardently pro-Israel, and he did pledge to help confirm her and give her his support. And that's significant because the Senate math is basically this. She can only lose 3 Republican senators from the majority and still get across the finish line and get confirmed. So by picking up a Democratic senator, it allows for the math to be such that a Republican might not vote against her or vote for her, and she still can be confirmed. So that's why that's particularly significant.
And finally, the United Nations contributes billions of dollars in foreign assistance each year, and the U.S. contribution makes up about 1/4 of that. VOA has also been looking into how an incoming Trump administration would approach foreign aid. What have you found?
So you heard a little bit of that at the end of Margaret Bashir's piece there, where she said the United Nations is basically preparing for possible cuts, right? Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who of course is the nominee to head the U.S. Department of State, he says, if confirmed, he will uphold Trump's policies. And what Trump has said in 2018, for example, is that he wants to support nations that, quote, have our interest at heart, respect America, and are, quote, our friends. Now, during his last presidency, he did make some cuts, but primarily in initiatives that support climate change and Palestinian aid. On the other hand, he really left a majority of other streams untouched. And so experts are predicting that the Trump administration will actually do a full audit of foreign aid programs before moving forward after that. So we'll have to wait and see if that's indeed the case. But that's the state of play in terms of the Trump administration's approach to foreign aid. Susan?
All right, Jessica, thank you so much for all of that. Have a great weekend and stay warm.
Thank you. You too.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.